Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a topic that, honestly, you probably wouldn't have survived in the past dating and marriage. Seriously, if you think navigating dating apps is tough, try doing it when your life depended on marrying a distant cousin or a stranger twice your age. Tonight, we're going to dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and ease into a journey through history where love was, well, complicated, to say the least. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's begin. You're walking through a muddy, unpaved street. The stench of unwashed bodies and animal waste clinging to the humid air. The year is, let's say, 1450, and you're somewhere in a bustling European town. Perhaps you're in London, near the Thames, or maybe Paris, close to the Seine. Forget about finding your soulmate. Your biggest concern is avoiding the plague, or perhaps a stray pig. Love. As you understand it today, that heady, passionate, individualistic quest for a kindred spirit is practically a foreign concept. Instead, you're navigating a world where relationships are less about personal fulfillment and more about survival, alliances, and the continuation of a family line. Imagine your parents, sitting around a rough-hewn table, discussing your future. They're not asking about your feelings or your dreams. No, they're meticulously poring over property deeds, livestock counts, and the social standing of potential matches. Your hand in marriage isn't a symbol of affection. It's a valuable commodity, a strategic pawn in a much larger game. You might be promised to someone you've never met, a person from a neighboring village or distant lord's family, all in the name of securing land, consolidating power, or perhaps just preventing your family from starving. You certainly don't get to swipe left, or right, or at all. You're a young woman, perhaps 16, in rural England. Your family owns a modest plot of land, enough to sustain you, but barely. A neighboring farmer, much older, with a gruff demeanor and a reputation for being tight-fisted, has expressed interest. His farm is larger, his fields more fertile. Your parents see not a man, but an opportunity. They see security. You, on the other hand, see a lifetime of arduous labor, punctuated by predictable, unromantic duty. But do you have a choice? Not really. To refuse would be to jeopardize your family's precarious existence, possibly condemning them to poverty or worse. This isn't a romantic comedy where you run off with a stable boy. This is gritty, historical reality. You are, in essence, a bargaining chip. Now, let's shift gears slightly. You're a young man in the same era, perhaps in colonial America. Say, 1680s Massachusetts. Your parents expect you to marry, and quickly. Not for love, but for labor. A wife means more hands to work the land, more children to ensure the family's future, and someone to manage the household. You might have a bit more say than your female counterparts, but your choices are still severely limited by practicalities. You need a woman who is strong, capable, and preferably from a reputable family, one that can bring a decent dowry, or at the very least, a good reputation. Love. That's a luxury, an afterthought, something that might or might not develop after the vows are exchanged. Historians still debate whether true romantic love, as we understand it, even existed as a widespread concept before the Enlightenment, or if it was merely a byproduct of economic and social shifts. Consider the bizarre, yet entirely logical, concept of the bundling board in early American courtship. You're a young couple, perhaps in New England, and it's winter. Heating is expensive. So, to conserve heat and prevent, well, too much physical intimacy, a board is placed between you in bed. You're fully clothed, of course. It sounds like a setup for a terrible sitcom. But it was a pragmatic solution to a very real problem: how to allow courtship to happen without incurring the wrath of worried parents or the financial burden of an extra fire. It was a societal workaround, a curious blend of puritanical caution and practical necessity, you'd think they'd just talk in the parlor. But apparently, a shared bed, with a physical barrier, was preferable. Go figure. And what about the constant threat of disease? You finally, begrudgingly, accepted your fate and married. Congratulations. Now prepare for the very real possibility that your spouse, or you, won't live to see old age. Childbirth was a leading cause of death for women, making every pregnancy a gamble with destiny. Diseases like smallpox, tuberculosis, and influenza swept through communities, indiscriminately claiming lives. You might marry for stability, but stability was a fleeting dream. Imagine the emotional toll of knowing that any embrace, any kiss could be your last, not due to passion, but due to an unseen microbe. It put a rather grim spin on "till death do us part." You really wouldn't want to date in a time before basic hygiene, let alone modern medicine. Your ideal partner might be strong and healthy, but so was everyone else, until they weren't. Let's talk about that dowry. It wasn't just a quaint custom, it was a fundamental pillar of marital agreements. For the bride's family, it was a way to ensure their daughter was provided for, a financial contribution to the new household. For the groom's family, it was an asset, sometimes crucial for their own economic stability. You're a young woman in 17th century Amsterdam. Your family a prosperous merchant class. Your dowry might consist of gold coins, fine linens, furniture, or even shares in a trading venture. The size of your dowry could determine your social standing within your new family, and even influence the kind of husband you attracted. No dowry. Your options were severely limited, perhaps to a life of spinsterhood, or worse, like forced into a convent, or a life of servitude. It was a high-stakes financial negotiation, with your personal happiness often a secondary concern. It's like a prenuptial agreement, but instead of protecting assets, it was the asset. You're a young man in early American frontier society, perhaps in Kentucky in the late 1700s. Your focus isn't on finding a beautiful woman, it's on finding a resilient one. Someone who can churn butter, tend a garden, spin wool, and raise a brood of children in a harsh, unforgiving environment. Beauty was fleeting, but practicality was paramount. Courtship often involved a display of skills, the man demonstrating his ability to hunt, clear land, or build, and the woman showcasing her domestic prowess. It wasn't about candlelit dinners, it was about proving you wouldn't be a burden. You might have courted by helping her family with chores, or she might have visited your cabin to demonstrate her cooking. It was less about charming poetry and more about practical demonstrations of competence. And yes, sometimes, the local community would literally chivalry a newlywed couple in noisy, sometimes disruptive celebration meant to ensure the marriage was properly consummated. It was the original no-pressure situation. And what if you didn't conform? What if you, a woman in this historical landscape, dared to desire someone outside the accepted norms, or refused a suitable match? The consequences could be dire. Social ostracization was common. You might be branded an old maid, a burden to your family, or even accused of witchcraft in more superstitious times. For men, while less severe, remaining unwed could mean a lack of social standing, a diminished reputation, and a life of loneliness, especially in societies where family units were the bedrock of community. It wasn't just about personal choice, it was about fulfilling your societal role. The pressure to marry wasn't just internal, it was a suffocating external force, applied by every aunt, uncle, and nosy neighbor. It was like a constant unspoken challenge. Are you ever going to settle down, but with much higher stakes? Consider the notion of family honor. Your marriage wasn't just about you, it was about your family's name, their reputation, their legacy. A scandalous marriage, or a failure to marry at all, could tarnish the entire lineage. You might be forced into a marriage you abhorred simply to uphold your family's standing in the community. This concept of collective identity over individual desire is a key difference from modern sensibilities. We often think of marriage as a deeply personal choice, but historically it was a communal affair, scrutinized and judged by everyone. It was less of a private contract and more of a public declaration, with your entire lineage hanging in the balance. So, as you can see, the path to partnership in historical times was less about romantic walks on the beach and more about navigating a treacherous landscape of social expectations, economic necessities, and sheer survival. The idea of dating for fun or marriage for love, as we know it, is a relatively recent invention. You were less a free agent and more a piece on a chessboard, moved by forces far greater than your own desires. It's enough to make you appreciate the simple freedom of choosing your own dinner, let alone your life partner. You're still in this historical landscape, perhaps now in Florence, Italy, during the Renaissance, or maybe 18th century New Orleans. The air might be filled with the scent of olive groves or the humid musk of the bayou, but one thing remains constant: the relentless, intricate dance of arranged marriages and dowry dramas. If you thought the last chapter was about simply not having a choice, this one delves into the sheer, suffocating complexity of that lack of choice, magnified by societal expectations and the cold, hard cash of family wealth. Imagine you're a young woman, perhaps named Isabella, from a prominent merchant family in Venice around 1550. Your future isn't in your hands. It's meticulously sculpted by your father and his male relatives. They're not looking for love. They're looking for a strategic alliance that will enhance their mercantile empire, perhaps secure new trade routes to the east, or solidify their position among the city's powerful elite. You are the collateral, the human bond in a contract far more intricate than any business deal you'll ever sign in your modern life. Your potential husband isn't chosen for his charm or wit, but for his family's wealth, influence, and political connections. He might be twice your age, a widower with a brood of children, or a man with a questionable reputation. But if his family possesses the right properties or holds sway in the Doge's council, then he is deemed a suitable match. You might be paraded before him and his family, scrutinized like a prize horse, your beauty and demeanor assessed for their potential to uphold the family's honor and produce heirs. It's like a corporate merger, but you're the company being acquired. The dowry here isn't just a simple payment. It's a monumental financial undertaking, often involving vast sums of money, precious jewels, intricate tapestries, and even valuable real estate. For your family, providing a suitable dowry could mean liquidating assets, borrowing heavily, or even selling off parts of their ancestral lands. It was a massive investment, a gamble, one that could either elevate their standing or plunge them into debt. The pressure to present a respectable dowry was immense, as it directly reflected on the family's prestige and the bride's perceived worth. Historians still debate the exact mechanisms and cultural nuances of dowry systems across different societies, questioning whether they were primarily protective measures for women or tools of patriarchal control. Now, switch perspective. You are Giovanni, a young man from a respectable but not immensely wealthy family in Naples. 1650, you need a wife, not just for companionship, but to bolster your family's finances and elevate their social standing. You can't afford to marry for love, even if such a concept crosses your mind. You need a bride with a substantial dowry, one that can pay off your father's debts, invest in a new venture, or secure your siblings' futures. Your parents are actively seeking out families with eligible daughters and considerable fortunes. You might attend social gatherings, not to find a love interest, but to subtly assess the financial viability of potential brides and their families. It's a bit like a covert financial audit, but with a potential spouse on the line, the process of negotiation for these marriages could be incredibly drawn out and complex. Families would employ go-betweens or matchmakers, often respected members of the community or even professional brokers, who would shuttle back and forth, haggling over the terms of the dowry, the specifics of the wedding contract, and the legal implications of the union. Every detail, from the number of dresses the bride would bring to the table to the specific clauses about inheritance, was meticulously debated. It was less a gentle courtship and more a grueling arbitration. You might not even meet your future spouse until the very end of this protracted negotiation, a mere formality before the public announcement. Consider the role of the church in all of this, especially in Catholic Europe. While the church emphasized the sanctity of marriage and, theoretically, required consent, the reality on the ground was often very different. Parental authority held immense sway, and a young person's consent might be little more than a reluctant nod under intense pressure. To defy your parents and the church's implicit support of familial arrangements could mean excommunication, disinheritance, or a lifetime of shame. It was a spiritual straitjacket, binding you to a fate chosen by others, ostensibly for your own good and the greater glory of your lineage. Let's imagine you're in colonial Virginia, 1720. Land is plentiful, but labor is scarce. You're a settler, perhaps a tobacco planter, and you need a wife not just for children, but for a partner in the grueling work of establishing a new life. While less formal than European aristocratic marriages, the pragmatism of the frontier still dictated choices. You might seek out a woman who had recently arrived from England, perhaps as an indentured servant, and pay for her freedom in exchange for her hand in marriage. Her dowry might be her strong back and willingness to work. It's a less glamorous version of the dowry, but no less transactional. You're not looking for someone to share your dreams with. You're looking for someone to help you survive. It's the ultimate working relationship, with no pretense of romance. You wouldn't want to show up to the local gathering with weak hands. Let me tell you. And what about breach of promise? In many historical contexts, once a marriage contract was agreed upon, even if not yet fully formalized, breaking it could have severe legal and social repercussions. You're a young woman in 19th century New York, promised to a man whose family has recently suffered a financial ruin. Your father, eager to salvage your prospects, tries to break the engagement, but the other family could sue for damages, arguing that your withdrawal has damaged their reputation and caused financial loss. This wasn't just about hurt feelings, it was about broken financial agreements, and the courts often sided with the aggrieved party. It's like a corporate merger falling apart, but the human cost is immeasurable. A gentleman would never do such a thing. Right. The very concept of love matches was often viewed with suspicion, if not outright disdain, by the elite. Such unions were seen as impulsive, risky, and detrimental to the careful, long-term planning of family dynasties. A young couple who dared to marry solely for affection might find themselves disinherited, ostracized, or simply struggling to survive without the financial and social backing of their families. It was a romantic notion, perhaps, but a financially reckless one in a world where economic stability was paramount. The idea that love could conquer all was a quaint fairy tale, not a viable life strategy. You might find yourself in a large household, perhaps in a French chateau in the 17th century, where your newly acquired spouse is a stranger. You share a name, a bed, and perhaps a superficial politeness, but true intimacy or connection might never develop. Your primary duty is to produce an heir, preferably male, to continue the family line. Your days are filled with managing the household, overseeing servants, or engaging in the social rituals expected of your station. Any personal desires or affections are secondary to this grand performance of duty. It's like being cast in a play you didn't audition for with a lifetime contract. The power dynamics within these arranged marriages were heavily skewed. Women, particularly, had very few rights. Once married, your property often became your husband's, your legal identity subsumed by his. You might not be able to own land, conduct business, or even represent yourself in court without his permission. Divorce was either impossible or incredibly difficult to obtain, leaving you trapped in a union, regardless of personal happiness or safety. It was a system designed to maintain order and tradition, not individual liberty. So, as you drift deeper into the past, it becomes clear that these weren't just marriages. They were complex, strategic maneuvers dictated by wealth, power, and societal pressure. The dowry wasn't just a gift, it was a cornerstone of the agreement. and the families involved treated it with the gravity of a major diplomatic treaty. You were not marrying a person, you were marrying a network of alliances, a ledger of assets, and a legacy stretching back generations. It's enough to make you appreciate the simple modern luxury of dating for vibes. You're now venturing into the murky, often bewildering world of courtship catastrophes. Forget swiping right or sending a witty text. In historical times, the path to finding a partner was paved with bizarre rituals, social minefields, and genuinely dangerous encounters. You're no longer just a pawn in a family's financial game. You're an active, albeit often unwilling, participant in a series of social dances where one misstep could ruin your reputation. Or worse. Let's transport ourselves to Victorian England, specifically London in the mid-1800s. You're a young woman, perhaps named Eleanor, of marriageable age. Your social life is a tightly choreographed ballet of rules and unspoken expectations. There's no casual hanging out. Every interaction with the opposite sex is loaded with significance. You can't simply speak to a man you find interesting. An introduction by a mutual acquaintance is absolutely essential. To do otherwise would be scandalously forward, jeopardizing your respectability, which, for a woman, was her most valuable asset. It's like navigating a fancy dinner party where every fork placement is a potential social faux pas. Imagine a formal ball. The room is awash with the rustle of silks and the faint scent of lavender. A gentleman approaches, bowing stiffly. He asks for a dance. This isn't just about enjoying the music. It's a carefully observed ritual. Too many dances with the same partner, or a dance with an inappropriate one, could lead to gossip and ruin your reputation. You might even have a chaperone, an older, unmarried aunt, or a stern governess hovering nearby. Their eyes like hawks, ensuring no impropriety occurs. Even a stolen glance or a prolonged conversation could lead to speculation. It's like dating under the constant gaze of 1,000 judgmental eyes. And what about the art of letter writing? This was a primary form of communication for courtship, especially over long distances. You're a young man, perhaps in New England during the American Civil War, writing to a woman in Georgia. Your letters aren't casual. They're carefully crafted prose, full of flowery language, subtle hints, and poetic declarations of admiration. Misinterpret a phrase, or fail to respond with appropriate decorum, and the budding romance could wither on the vine. Imagine the anxiety of waiting weeks for a reply, wondering if your carefully chosen words landed correctly, or if you accidentally insulted her family by using the wrong salutation. It's the original read receipt, but with much higher stakes and zero emojis. Consider the notion of calling cards. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries in American cities like New York or Boston, this was how initial overtures were made. As a gentleman, you'd leave your card at a lady's home. If she wished to entertain your interest, she would invite you to call on her during designated at-home hours, usually in the afternoon. You'd sit in her parlor under the watchful eye of a family member, engaging in polite conversation. There was no going out for coffee or a movie. All interactions happened on her turf, on her terms, and with her family as an audience. It was less a date and more an interrogation. Scholars still debate whether these formal rituals stifled genuine emotion or provided a structured framework for emotional development. Let's talk about gifts. For a gentleman, sending gifts was a delicate matter. Too lavish, and you might seem ostentatious or trying to buy affection. Too meager, and you might appear cheap or disinterested. A carefully chosen bouquet of flowers, where each bloom carried a specific, coded meaning, the language of flowers. Remember, was a common choice. A yellow rose, for instance, might signify jealousy, while a red one declared passionate love. Imagine trying to navigate this botanical minefield without accidentally sending the wrong message. It's like trying to decode a secret language, except the consequence of failure is a broken heart and a damaged reputation. Now, let's step back into the more rugged terrain of frontier America, say Missouri in the early 1800s. Courtship here was less about formal dances and more about practicality and community gatherings. You'd meet potential partners at barn raisings, quilting bees, or church socials. Your courtship might involve helping a family with chores, demonstrating your physical prowess and capability as a future provider. For women, it was about showcasing domestic skills, cooking, sewing, managing a household. These weren't subtle hints. They were overt demonstrations of your fitness for marriage. It was like an ongoing job interview, but the job was spouse. You probably didn't want to show up to the barn raising with soft hands. Let me tell you. And then there were the sparking lamps in some rural American communities. You're visiting your potential beloved's home, and to ensure propriety, the parents would provide a special lamp with a very dim flame, or even place it behind a screen. The idea was to allow the couple to talk, but without enough light for anything untoward to occur. It sounds absurdly controlling, but it was a common practice, a pragmatic solution to the anxieties of unsupervised courtship. It's like having a date in a darkened room, but not in a romantic way, more in a we don't trust you kind of way. Consider the pressure to marry within your social class or religious group. In many historical societies, particularly in places like Boston with its strong Puritan roots, or the southern plantations with their rigid social hierarchies, marrying outside your station was almost unthinkable. Such a match could lead to disinheritance, social ruin, and complete ostracization. Families would go to great lengths to prevent unsuitable matches, sometimes even sending children away or orchestrating elaborate deceptions. Your personal feelings were secondary to the maintenance of social order and purity of lineage. It was like trying to climb a social ladder made of glass, where one wrong step could shatter everything. Finally, think about the sheer lack of privacy. In tightly knit communities or large family homes, every aspect of your courtship was observed, commented upon, and judged. Gossip was rampant, and a single rumor, true or false, could destroy a reputation overnight. There was no escaping the watchful eyes of neighbors, relatives, and even servants. It was like living in a reality TV show, but without the cameras, and with much more severe consequences for low ratings. It's enough to make you long for the anonymity of an online dating profile, where at least your immediate family isn't critiquing your every message. So, from the rigid formalities of Victorian parlors to the practical showcases of frontier life, historical courtship was a minefield of unspoken rules, public scrutiny, and often a distinct lack of genuine romantic connection. It wasn't about finding your person, it was about successfully navigating a complex social game to secure a suitable partner, often with your entire future and your family's honor hanging in the balance. It really makes you appreciate the ability to just ask someone out for coffee. You've survived the brutal courtship rituals, and somehow, you've managed to get married. Congratulations now. Prepare yourself for the often grim realities of marital misery and legal labyrinths in historical times. This isn't the part where the credits roll and you live happily ever after. Oh no. This is where the real fun begins, filled with unequal rights, societal constraints, and precious little recourse if things went south. Let's imagine you're a woman in 17th century colonial America, perhaps in Plymouth Colony. The moment you say "I do," your legal identity, as we understand it, largely ceases to exist. This was the era of coverture, a legal doctrine imported from England, where a married woman's legal rights and obligations were subsumed by her husband's. You couldn't own property in your own name, enter into contracts, or even bring a lawsuit without your husband's consent. Your wages, if you earned any, legally belonged to him. It's like having your personal operating system completely merged with someone else's, with them holding all the administrative privileges. If your husband was a tyrant, you were, quite literally, his property. Consider the notion of duty within marriage. For women, this meant an almost unending litany of domestic tasks cooking over an open fire, churning butter, spinning wool, making clothes, tending a garden, preserving food, and, of course, bearing and raising children. For men, duty involved providing for the family, often through arduous physical labor like farming, hunting, or a trade. There was little room for personal aspirations or individual fulfillment beyond these prescribed roles. Your life was dictated by necessity and expectation, not by personal desire. It's like a perpetual chore list, with no days off and no holidays. Now, let's talk about the utter impossibility of divorce for the vast majority of people. In most historical societies, particularly in Christian Europe and its colonies, marriage was considered a sacred, unbreakable bond, ordained by God. Annulments were rare and usually only granted by the church to the wealthy and powerful, based on very specific grounds like pre-existing marriage or non-consummation. For the average person, if your marriage was miserable, abusive, or simply loveless, you were generally stuck. Forever. No conscious uncoupling here. It's like being locked in a room with someone you despise, and the key has been thrown into the deepest ocean. Historians still debate the extent to which informal separations and desertion occurred, despite the legal and social prohibitions against divorce. Imagine you're a woman in early 19th century New York. Your husband is a drunkard who gambles away all his money, leaving you and your children destitute. In modern times, you'd seek a divorce, legal protection, and child support. In the past, your options were incredibly limited. You might appeal to community leaders or the church, but their power to intervene was often limited to moral persuasion. Desertion by a husband was a serious crime, but proving it and then enforcing any kind of support was a monumental task. You might be forced to rely on charity, or worse, enter into indentured servitude just to feed your children. The law offered little to no safety net for women in such circumstances. It was a terrifyingly precarious existence, where your entire well-being hinged on the temperament and goodwill of one man. What if your husband was abusive? In many historical legal systems, marital rape wasn't even recognized as a concept. A husband had a right to his wife's body. Domestic violence, while sometimes condemned by community norms, was rarely grounds for legal intervention, let alone divorce. A woman might suffer in silence with nowhere to turn. The idea of safe spaces or hotlines for victims of domestic abuse simply didn't exist. Your home, theoretically your sanctuary, could be your prison. It's a stark reminder of the sheer vulnerability of individuals, particularly women, within these historical marital structures. Let's shift focus to men. While they held more legal power, marriage could still be a trap. If you married a woman from a powerful family, you might find yourself subservient to your in-laws, bound by their expectations and demands. Or perhaps your wife was lazy, infertile, or ill, and you were stuck with no legal recourse. While a man could usually desert his wife with fewer immediate legal consequences than a woman, the social stigma and the practical burden of managing a household alone were significant. If your wife refused her marital duties, which often included childbirth, even against her will, it could be a source of immense frustration and societal pressure. It wasn't always a walk in the park for the guys either. Consider the complexities of inheritance laws. If your husband died without a will, or if his will was poorly drafted, you as a widow might find yourself with very little. In many legal systems, the eldest son inherited the bulk of the property, leaving the widow and younger children in precarious financial situations. You might be forced to rely on the charity of your male relatives, or manage a dower portion that was insufficient to maintain your previous lifestyle. The stability of your old age often hinged on the good graces of your children or other family members, not on your own legal rights. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? And what about the constant pressure to produce heirs? Particularly male ones if you were a woman who struggled with infertility, or who bore only daughters. You could face immense pressure, blame, and even the threat of repudiation, though less common than outright divorce. Your worth as a wife was often inextricably linked to your ability to continue the family line. This was especially true in aristocratic families, where the succession of titles and lands depended on male heirs. Imagine the anxiety, the fear, and the profound sense of failure you might experience under such unrelenting scrutiny. So, while the institution of marriage provided a framework for societal order and family lineage, it was often a personal prison for those within it. The idea of a mutually supportive, loving partnership where both individuals had equal rights and opportunities for recourse was a far-off dream. You were bound by law, custom, and religion, and often there was no escape. It really makes you appreciate the intricacies of modern divorce law. Despite all its challenges, you've navigated the treacherous waters of historical courtship and endured the often bleak realities of marriage. Now, let's talk about something truly terrifying, the perils of parenthood past. If you think raising kids today is tough, imagine doing it without modern medicine, child labor laws, or even a basic understanding of germ theory. You're not just hoping your child thrives, you're praying they survive. Let's transport ourselves to a small farm in rural Ohio, around 1830. You're a young mother, perhaps named Sarah. You've just given birth, likely at home, with the help of a local midwife, not a trained doctor in a sterile hospital. The pain is immense, the risk of infection ever present, postpartum hemorrhage, eclampsia, and puerperal fever were rampant, often claiming the lives of mothers within days of childbirth. You might be delirious, weak, and utterly exhausted, but within days, sometimes hours. You're expected to resume your endless chores. There's no maternity leave here, just the relentless demands of farm life. It's like running a marathon immediately after major surgery. Now, consider the sheer number of children you were expected to have. Family planning, as we know it, was largely non-existent or ineffective. Large families were not just desirable, they were often an economic necessity, providing crucial labor for farms and businesses. You might have 6, 8, even 10 or more children, often spaced closely together. Each pregnancy a drain on your body and a gamble with your life. Imagine the physical toll, the constant exhaustion, and the emotional burden of raising a large brood in an era where infant and child mortality rates were staggeringly high. It's like having an entire baseball team, but half of them might not make it to kindergarten. Let's talk about infant mortality. This is where it gets truly heartbreaking. You've just welcomed a tiny, fragile life into the world, but the odds are stacked against them. Diseases like diphtheria, measles, whooping cough, and scarlet fever swept through communities, often claiming multiple children from the same family. Basic sanitation was poor, clean water was not guaranteed, and medical interventions were crude at best. You might spend weeks nursing a sick child, only to watch them succumb to an illness that today would be easily treatable with a vaccine or a course of antibiotics. The emotional resilience required to face such frequent loss is almost unimaginable. Scholars still grapple with the psychological impact of such high child mortality rates on historical parents, questioning how grief was processed in a society where it was an almost constant companion. Imagine you're a father in New York City in the mid-19th century. You work long hours to support your family, but the specter of illness is always looming. You come home one evening to find your youngest, a lively toddler, burning with fever. There's no emergency room. No pediatrician's office open late. You might send for the local doctor who arrives with a bag full of dubious remedies like laudanum and opium tincture or bloodletting tools. The cure might be as dangerous as the disease itself. You stand by, helpless, watching your child suffer, knowing that despite all your efforts, their fate rests in the hands of a power far greater than any medical knowledge of the time. It's a level of helplessness that few modern parents ever truly experience. And what about child labor? As soon as children were physically capable, they were expected to contribute to the family economy. If you were on a farm, this meant endless chores weeding fields, milking cows, gathering eggs, fetching water, caring for younger siblings. If you were in an urban setting, Particularly in the industrializing world of the late 18th and 19th centuries, your children might be sent to work in factories, mines, or as chimney sweeps, enduring dangerous conditions for meager wages. You, as a parent, might abhor this. But for many, it was a necessity to prevent the entire family from starving. It's a harsh reality to reconcile your love for your child, pitted against the desperate need for their labor. Consider the discipline. Childhood, as a protected period of play and learning, is a relatively modern concept. In many historical contexts, children were viewed as miniature adults, expected to be obedient, industrious, and respectful. Physical punishment was not only common, but often encouraged, seen as a necessary tool for shaping character and instilling piety. You might be whipped for disobedience, sent to bed without food, or made to work extra hours. The emotional scars of such upbringing were likely profound, even if outwardly accepted as normal. It's like growing up in a boot camp, where every misstep brings a swift and sometimes brutal consequence. Let's shift to the specific challenges of adolescence. You're a teenager in early 20th century rural America, perhaps in Kansas. Your education is likely minimal, cut short by the demands of farm work or the need to contribute to the family income. Your future is largely predetermined. You will marry someone from a similar background, have children, and continue the cycle of rural life. The idea of finding yourself, exploring different career paths, or delaying marriage for personal growth was a luxury few could afford. Your parents, having survived a harsher world, instilled in you a strict sense of duty and conformity. It's like being on a conveyor belt to adulthood, with no off-ramps or scenic detours. Finally, think about the sheer lack of knowledge. Parents operated on a blend of folk remedies, superstition, and passed-down wisdom, much of which was ineffective or even harmful. The concept of vitamins, hygiene, or sterile environments was unknown. You might wrap your sick child in layers of blankets to sweat out a fever, unwittingly making them worse. You might feed them a diet lacking essential nutrients, leading to chronic illness. You tried your best, with the limited understanding available, but the stakes were always incredibly high. It's enough to make you profoundly grateful for pediatricians, vaccines, and even just the knowledge that washing your hands can save lives. So, while the desire to protect and nurture one's offspring is timeless, the means and outcomes of historical parenthood were profoundly different, marked by constant fear, physical hardship, and often heartbreaking loss. The journey of raising a child was a perilous one, a testament to the enduring human spirit in the face of overwhelming odds. It truly makes you appreciate the relative safety and knowledge we have today. You've seen the struggles of courtship, marriage, and even raising children in a bygone era. Now, let's talk about what happened if you dared to step outside the incredibly narrow confines of societal expectations, social stigma, and unwed woes. This is where the judgment, the whispers, and the outright cruelty of historical communities could truly crush an individual, particularly a woman. Imagine you're a young woman in 18th century colonial Philadelphia. You find yourself pregnant, but without a husband. This isn't just a personal crisis, it's a monumental public scandal. You're branded an unwed mother, a term laden with shame and condemnation. You might be publicly denounced in church, banished from your community, or even forced to endure physical punishments. Your reputation is utterly destroyed, and with it, your prospects for a respectable future. There's no support system, no understanding, just a crushing wave of moral outrage. It's like being forced to wear a scarlet letter. But the judgment is far more pervasive than just a piece of fabric. Consider the desperate measures some women took to conceal their pregnancies or abandon their infants. The historical record is full of tragic stories of infanticide, a horrific act born out of profound fear and desperation. While legally punishable, the societal pressure and lack of options for unwed mothers often push them to unthinkable extremes. The fear of social ruin, of becoming an outcast, was so overwhelming that some saw no other way out. It's a chilling reminder of the brutal consequences of a society that offered no mercy for those who deviated from the norm. Now, let's talk about the dreaded title of spinster or old maid. You're a woman in 19th century New England, perhaps in a mill town like Lowell, Massachusetts. You've passed your prime marriageable age, perhaps in your late 20s or early 30s, without securing a husband. You're not seen as an independent, self-sufficient individual. You're viewed as a failure, an anomaly. You might be pitied, gossiped about, or even ostracized. Your societal role was inextricably linked to marriage and motherhood, and without it, you were often seen as incomplete, a burden, or simply left on the shelf. It's like being perpetually stuck in the friend zone, but with added societal ridicule and a distinct lack of purpose. For men, the stigma of remaining unwed was less severe but still present. You might be labeled a confirmed bachelor, viewed with suspicion, or considered eccentric. In communities where family units were the bedrock of society, an unwed man might lack social standing and influence. He might be seen as irresponsible, unwilling to take on the duties of family life, or even morally suspect. While he wouldn't face the same level of public shaming as an unwed mother, the quiet judgment and social exclusion could still be profound. It's like being perpetually singled out at family gatherings, with everyone asking why you haven't settled down yet. Imagine the economic consequences of unwed status, especially for women. Without a husband, your economic opportunities were severely limited. You might be forced into low-paying domestic service, factory work, or rely on the charity of relatives. Owning property, securing a loan, or running a successful business were often impossible without a male guarantor. Your financial independence was severely curtailed, making the pressure to marry even more intense, regardless of personal feelings. It's like trying to build a career with one hand tied behind your back, while everyone else has both hands free and a head start. Consider the issue of illegitimacy for children born outside of wedlock. These children faced a lifetime of discrimination and hardship. They might be denied inheritance rights, shunned by society, and carry the stigma of their birth throughout their lives. Their prospects for education, marriage, and social advancement were severely limited. They were, in essence, punished for circumstances entirely beyond their control. Historians still extensively debate the varying social and legal statuses of illegitimate children across different eras and regions. Noting significant differences in how they were treated, let's look at the concept of rehabilitation for those who transgressed. For an unwed mother, true social rehabilitation was rare. Even if she eventually married, the shadow of her past often lingered, affecting her children's prospects and her standing in the community. Society was unforgiving, holding onto past mistakes with a tenacious grip. It's like having a permanent black mark on your record. No matter how much time passes or how much you try to atone, the pressure to conform extended to physical appearance and behavior. A woman who is too outspoken, too independent, or too unladylike might find her marriage prospects dwindling. She might be considered unmarriageable, even if she was otherwise well regarded. Society had very specific boxes for people to fit into, and those who dared to color outside the lines faced significant consequences. It's like being forced into a costume that doesn't fit, and being judged harshly for it. Finally, think about the immense psychological toll this kind of pervasive judgment took. The constant fear of exposure, the internal shame, the feeling of being a social pariah. These would have had a profound impact on an individual's mental well-being. There was no concept of mental health support, no therapist to talk to. You suffered in silence, internalizing the societal condemnation, often leading to depression, anxiety, and a deep sense of isolation. It's a stark reminder that some of the greatest cruelties of the past were not always physical, but deeply psychological. So, from the public shaming of unwed mothers to the quiet despair of spinsters, historical societies wielded social stigma as a powerful weapon. Your personal choices, particularly in matters of love and family, were not yours alone. They were subject to the harsh judgment of an unforgiving community. It really makes you appreciate the relative freedom and acceptance we have today for diverse lifestyles and family structures. You've seen the sticky web of societal expectations. Now, let's talk about what happened when the marital bond, however reluctantly formed, became utterly unbearable divorce despair and second chances. In many historical eras, the concept of simply getting a divorce was as alien as personal flying machines. If you were trapped in a truly awful marriage, your options were often non-existent, leaving you in a desolate landscape with little hope of escape. Imagine you're a woman in 16th century England. Your husband is cruel, perhaps abusive, or simply a drunkard who has squandered your dowry and abandoned you. You might dream of freedom, of a life away from his tyranny. But under English common law, divorce, as we understand it today, was virtually impossible. Marriage was a sacrament, till death do us part, and only an act of parliament or an ecclesiastical annulment for very specific, rare grounds could break it. You were legally bound, often with no escape. It's like being chained to a rock, watching the tide slowly rise with no rescue in sight. Even if you managed to secure a legal separation, known as divorce immensa et thoro from bed and board, it didn't dissolve the marriage. It only allowed you to live apart from your spouse. You couldn't remarry, and your legal status remained that of a married woman. For all intents and purposes, you were still legally tied to your tormentor. It offered some physical distance, perhaps, but no true freedom or the chance for a new life. It was a half measure, offering little solace. Now, let's fast forward to early America, say New England in the 1700s. Here, things were slightly different, though still incredibly difficult. Some Puritan colonies, viewing marriage as a civil contract as well as a religious one, allowed for divorce, but only on very strict grounds: adultery, desertion, or extreme cruelty. You couldn't just walk into a court and file papers. You had to present compelling evidence, often in a public forum, detailing the intimate failures and abuses of your marriage. Imagine having to air all your dirty laundry, every painful detail, before a judge in a room full of curious onlookers. The shame, the humiliation, could be immense. It's like a televised trial of your personal failings, with no privacy or dignity. Historians still debate the extent to which these early American divorce laws provided genuine relief for women, or simply offered a public spectacle. Consider the financial implications. If you were a woman seeking a divorce, you often faced destitution. Your husband was legally obligated to support you, but enforcing this was a monumental task. You might be left with nothing, forced to rely on the charity of relatives or enter into low-paying labor. For men, while they generally retained control of property, a divorce could still mean a damaged reputation and the loss of the wife's labor and dowry. There was no concept of equitable division of assets. It was a winner-take-all situation, with women almost always losing out. What if you chose to simply desert your spouse? For men, this was a more feasible, though still socially condemned, option. He could simply pack up and leave, perhaps heading west to seek a new life, leaving his wife and children behind. For women, desertion was far more dangerous. You risked being accused of vagrancy, losing your children, and facing severe social ostracism with almost no means of support. The world was not kind to single, unattached women. It's like jumping off a cliff without knowing if there's water below or jagged rocks. Let's look at the Catholic Church's stance in Europe and parts of the Americas. In places like Louisiana under French or Spanish rule, or much of Latin America, the Church's influence meant that divorce was absolutely forbidden. Annulment was the only recourse, and it was a costly, lengthy process, often requiring immense political or social influence, reserved almost exclusively for the elite. For the common person, an unhappy marriage was a lifelong sentence, sanctioned by divine law. It's a spiritual lock-in with no earthly escape hatch, even in societies where some form of divorce existed. The idea of a second chance was often fraught with difficulty. If you were a divorced woman, you carried a social stigma. Your reputation was tarnished, making it harder to find a new, respectable spouse. You might be seen as damaged goods, or blamed for the failure of your previous marriage. While men generally faced less stigma, a divorce could still affect their standing in the community and their relationships with potential new families. It was like wearing a permanent scarlet letter, not of adultery, but of marital failure, making every new relationship a struggle against prejudice. Imagine the sheer emotional toll of being trapped in an unbearable marriage with no legal or social recourse. The despair, the resentment, the feeling of hopelessness could be overwhelming. There were no support groups, no legal aid services, no one to advocate for your rights. You were left to suffer in silence, your misery a private burden in a world that offered no sympathy. This profound sense of being utterly alone in your suffering is a chilling reminder of the harshness of historical life. So, while tales of forbidden love and daring escapes might fill romantic novels, the reality of divorce in history was a bleak landscape of limited options, immense social pressure, and profound personal despair. The idea of a clean break and a fresh start was a modern luxury, built on centuries of struggle for individual rights and autonomy. It makes you realize how much we take for granted the relatively simple act of seeking a divorce today. You've glimpsed the grim realities of historical relationships. Now, let's delve into something that added an extra layer of dread to marriage medical mayhem and matrimonial maladies. Forget your annual physical or a quick trip to the urgent care. In the past, a simple illness could spell disaster for your marriage, and the cures were often as terrifying as the diseases themselves. You're not just trying to keep your relationship alive, you're literally trying to keep yourselves alive. Imagine you're a young couple in 18th century colonial New York, perhaps living in a bustling, albeit unhygienic, settlement. You've both managed to survive childhood, a feat in itself. But now, as newlyweds, you face the constant threat of epidemic diseases. A wave of smallpox sweeps through your community. You watch as neighbors, friends, and even family members succumb to the agonizing illness. If one of you falls ill, the other becomes the primary caregiver, facing the terrifying prospect of contagion. The fear isn't just for your own life, but for the future of your nascent family. It's like living in a constant state of biological warfare, where the enemy is invisible and everywhere. Consider the horrors of childbirth. As a woman, every pregnancy was a roll of the dice. You're in rural Kentucky, early 1800s. Your labor is long and difficult. There's no hospital, no epidural, just a local midwife and perhaps a few female relatives. Infections like puerperal fever, caused by unsterile conditions, were rampant and often fatal. If the baby was in a difficult position, there were no C-sections. Instead, crude instruments might be used, often resulting in severe injury or death for both mother and child. Historians still debate the true maternal mortality rates across different regions and time periods, but consensus holds that childbirth was one of the deadliest events in a woman's life. You really wouldn't want to go through that without modern medical assistance. Remember that old sunscreen made of crocodile dung? Probably more effective than some of the birthing practices. And what about general health? You're in Boston in the 1700s. The water supply is questionable, sanitation is poor, and diets are often lacking in essential nutrients. Diseases like tuberculosis, consumption, dysentery, and typhoid fever were commonplace. A chronic illness could render a spouse unable to work, plunging the family into poverty. A sudden, severe illness could mean quick death, leaving the surviving spouse widowed and potentially destitute, especially for women with limited legal and economic rights. Your ability to fulfill your marital duties, to work and contribute, was constantly threatened by invisible pathogens. It's like being perpetually on the brink of financial ruin due to health issues. With no insurance or safety net, let's talk about the cures themselves. You're experiencing a fever in Virginia during the Revolutionary War era. The local doctor, if one is even available, might prescribe bloodletting, believing that illness was caused by an imbalance of humors in the body. Leeches or a lancet might be applied, draining blood from your body, often weakening you further. Or perhaps you'd be given mercury-based compounds which caused their own host of toxic side effects, from tremors to tooth loss. Imagine entrusting your life, or your spouse's life, to such barbaric practices. It's like trying to fix a complex machine with a hammer and a prayer. Consider the impact of chronic illness on marital intimacy and happiness. If one spouse suffered from a debilitating condition, their role in the marriage as a partner, a laborer, a parent would be severely compromised. This could lead to immense strain, resentment, and a profound sense of loss, especially if medical knowledge offered no hope of recovery. The emotional and physical burdens placed on the healthy spouse were immense, often requiring them to take on additional labor and caregiving duties. It's a test of vows, like in sickness and in health, pushed to their absolute limit. With little external support, even seemingly minor ailments could have major consequences. A severe toothache in 19th century frontier towns like those in Texas could lead to a life-threatening infection if not properly treated. And properly treated often meant pulling the tooth without anesthetic. A broken bone could result in lifelong disability if not set correctly. These weren't just discomforts, they were potential life enders that could irrevocably alter the course of a marriage and a family's well-being. It really makes you appreciate modern dentistry, let me tell you. And what about mental health? While less understood, conditions like depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress would have been prevalent, particularly given the harsh realities of historical life. However, there was little to no understanding or treatment for these conditions. A spouse suffering from mental illness might be dismissed as melancholy, hysterical, or simply mad, with no access to compassionate care. This could put an immense strain on the other spouse, who might feel isolated, helpless, and burdened by a condition they couldn't understand or alleviate. It's like navigating a dark maze with no map and no light. So, beyond the social and economic challenges, historical marriages were constantly threatened by the grim realities of limited medical knowledge and pervasive disease. The daily struggle for survival permeated every aspect of life, including the most intimate and fundamental aspects of a partnership. It really makes you grateful for sterile environments, antibiotics, and the comforting knowledge that a visit to the doctor won't involve a sharp blade in a bucket. You've glimpsed the physical dangers and medical mysteries that plagued historical relationships. Now, prepare to descend into an even darker realm, the darker side of domesticity. Forget idyllic family portraits. Behind the closed doors of many historical homes lurked abuse, power imbalances, and a terrifying lack of recourse for those who suffered. This is where the concept of private matters often meant unseen suffering. Imagine you're a woman in 17th century Salem, Massachusetts. Your husband is controlling, perhaps prone to fits of rage and often physically abusive. In this patriarchal society, the husband was legally considered the head of the household, with broad authority over his wife and children. While extreme cruelty was sometimes frowned upon by the community, it was rarely interfered with by law enforcement or the courts unless it reached a truly egregious level. And even then, recourse was minimal. The adage, "rule your wife as you rule your horse," was not uncommon. Your home, supposedly your sanctuary, could be your personal prison, and your husband, your jailer. It's like being trapped in a cage with the person who holds the key, and no one outside is even looking in. Consider the legal concept of chastisement. In many common law traditions, a husband had the legal right to chastise his wife, meaning to physically punish her, provided he didn't inflict permanent injury. While this right gradually eroded over centuries, its lingering presence meant that domestic violence was often seen as a private family matter, not a crime. You might bear the bruises, the cuts, the emotional scars, but there was no one to call, no shelter to escape to. The law, in essence, gave perpetrators a tacit license to inflict harm. Historians still debate the extent to which these legal allowances translated into widespread physical abuse. Acknowledging the limitations of historical records and capturing the full scope of such private sufferings. Now, let's look at economic control. You're a woman in 19th century New Orleans, married to a man who controls all the finances, even the dowry you brought into the marriage. He might withhold money for necessities, preventing you from buying food, clothing, or seeking medical care for your children. This financial abuse was a powerful tool of control, making it virtually impossible for women to leave abusive situations, even if they dared. Without independent means, you were utterly dependent on your husband's whim. It's like being a bird in a gilded cage, but the gold offers no comfort when you're starving. What about the threat of sexual coercion and marital rape? As discussed previously, the concept of marital rape simply didn't exist in law for centuries. A husband had a legal right to his wife's body. This meant that sexual acts, even if non-consensual, were not considered crimes within the bounds of marriage. The psychological impact of such a reality is profound, stripping women of bodily autonomy and leaving them vulnerable to repeated violation with no legal protection or societal understanding. It's a chilling reminder of the utter lack of agency women possessed in many historical unions. Imagine being a child in such a household, witnessing parental abuse, living in an atmosphere of fear and tension would have had profound and lasting psychological effects. There were no child protective services, no counselors to talk to. Children were often seen as property, subject to the whims of their parents, and their welfare was rarely prioritized over the rights of the head of the household. It's like growing up in a war zone, but the battlefield is your own home. Let's consider the loneliness and isolation that often accompanied these darker domestic realities. In many close-knit communities, discretion was paramount. To speak out against a spouse, especially a husband, could bring shame upon the entire family and lead to social ostracization. Victims often suffered in silence, believing they had no one to confide in, no one who would believe them, and no one who could help. The shame of being a victim was often compounded by the fear of being blamed for the abuse. It's like being stranded on an island, surrounded by people, but utterly alone. Even if a woman somehow managed to escape an abusive husband, the societal consequences were severe. She might be accused of desertion, lose her children, and find herself completely destitute. Her reputation would be ruined, making it nearly impossible to remarry or find respectable employment. The system was designed to keep women within their marriages, no matter how dire the circumstances, effectively trapping them in abusive situations with no viable exit strategy. So, while we often romanticize the past, it's crucial to remember that the institution of marriage, stripped of modern legal protections and social awareness, could be a terrifying place. The darker side of domesticity was a reality for countless individuals, particularly women, who navigated a world where their suffering often remained unseen, unheard, and unaddressed. It makes you profoundly grateful for the legal frameworks and social support systems that, however imperfect, exist today to protect individuals from such hidden horrors. You've journeyed through the often bleak landscape of historical dating and marriage, witnessing the societal pressures, physical dangers, and emotional tolls that shaped relationships for centuries. Now, as our journey through the past draws to a close, let's find a glimmer of hope in modern mirth, reflecting on how far we've come and acknowledging that while perfection is elusive, the landscape of love and partnership is undeniably brighter. Imagine standing on the precipice of the 20th century in New York City, looking back at the centuries we've explored. The very idea of dating for pleasure, for personal connection, rather than solely for marital prospects, is a relatively recent invention, blossoming with urbanization and increased personal freedoms. You're not just meeting someone your family picked, you're going to a dance hall, a Nickelodeon, or a jazz club, perhaps even without a chaperone. The thrill of choosing, of seeking out someone who truly sparks your interest, is a radical shift. It's like finally being allowed to pick your own adventure, after generations of being handed a script, Consider the profound impact of women's suffrage and the fight for equal rights. As women gained the right to vote, to own property, to pursue education and careers, their legal and economic dependence on men began to diminish. You're a woman in 1920s Chicago, working in an office, earning your own wage. This newfound financial independence means you can delay marriage, or even choose not to marry at all, without facing destitution. You have the power to leave an unhappy or abusive marriage, knowing that legal recourse and a path to self-sufficiency might actually exist. It's like finally being given the keys to your own car, after a lifetime of being a passenger. Scholars still extensively analyze the precise moments and movements that truly empowered women in dating and marriage, marking the nuanced shifts from patriarchal control to increasing autonomy. Now, let's talk about the evolving concept of love and companionship. The idea that marriage should be based primarily on romantic love, mutual respect, and shared emotional intimacy is a modern ideal, one that has gradually replaced the purely pragmatic arrangements of the past. You're a young person today, in any town in America, seeking a partner. You're looking for someone who understands you, who shares your values, who makes you laugh. This profound shift in expectations means that relationships are, at their best, built on a foundation of genuine affection and partnership, rather than just economic necessity or social obligation. It's like moving from black and white photographs to vibrant, full-color cinematography. Think about the sheer variety of ways to meet people today. From online dating apps to social clubs, from shared hobbies to chance encounters in a coffee shop in Seattle. The avenues for connection are seemingly endless. You can filter for common interests, explore diverse backgrounds, and connect with people across geographical distances. This democratizing of connection has shattered the rigid social barriers that once dictated who you could even speak to, let alone marry. It's like having a global directory of potential companions right in your pocket. You certainly don't have to rely on a dim, sparking lamp anymore. And what about the progress in family planning and reproductive rights? The ability to choose if and when to have children has fundamentally transformed the lives of women and the dynamics of marriage. You can pursue educational goals, career ambitions, and personal development without the constant fear of unwanted pregnancy or the expectation of endless childbearing. This autonomy over one's body has empowered individuals to enter into relationships by choice, rather than out of biological imperative or societal pressure. It's like being able to plot your own course, rather than being swept along by an unseen current. Consider the shift in gender roles within relationships. While work remains to be done, the traditional rigid roles of provider and homemaker are increasingly being challenged and renegotiated. Couples today often share responsibilities, support each other's careers, and parent collaboratively. This move towards more egalitarian partnerships fosters greater understanding, shared experiences, and a deeper sense of teamwork. It's like moving from a rigid hierarchy to a collaborative partnership where both players contribute equally. Of course, it's not all sunshine and roses. Modern dating and marriage have their own unique complexities. The paradox of choice, the pressures of social media, the complexities of blended families. And yes, relationships can still be hard work. But the fundamental difference is the presence of choice, agency, and the possibility of escape. If a relationship becomes unhealthy or abusive, legal and social support systems, however imperfect, now exist to offer an exit. The idea that a woman can initiate a divorce, retain her independence, and find a second chance at happiness is a testament to immense societal progress. It's like having multiple escape routes and a support team, instead of being locked in a burning building. So, as we bring this journey to a close, take a moment to reflect on the immense strides humanity has made in the realm of love, dating, and marriage. While the quest for a fulfilling partnership remains a deeply personal and often challenging endeavor, the historical context reminds us just how much freedom, choice, and opportunity we now possess. It truly makes you appreciate the complexities, the freedoms, and yes, even the occasional frustrations of dating and marriage in the 21st century.